She's too fat to be a rancher's wife. Send her back. Amelia Rose Carter heard every word. She was standing 10 feet away, holding the cancellation letter with both hands, reading it for the second time, because she could not quite believe the first time was real. Around her, the entire Harlow Creek train station had gone quiet. That particular ugly quiet of people watching someone's life collapse and feeling grateful it wasn't theirs. She folded the letter. She pressed it flat against her chest. She picked up her suitcase. She did not cry. She walked straight to the stagecoach and said, "I need a ticket to Cheyenne." If that moment hit you, subscribe, ring that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning Amelia Carter stepped off the train in Harlow Creek, Wyoming, she carried two things that nobody bothered to notice. The first was a small brown suitcase, scuffed at the corners from years of careful use, packed with everything practical she owned. 2 dresses, a ledger book, a worn copy of Household Accounting Principles, a jar of dried lavender her mother had pressed into her hands the morning she left, and the folded marriage proposal letter she had read so many times, the creases had gone soft. The second thing she carried was hope. And hope she would learn before the morning was out was the heavier burden. She had left Wichita 3 weeks earlier after answering a mail-order bride advertisement placed in the Regional Gazette by a ranch owner in Wyoming Territory. The advertisement had been simple and direct, which she appreciated. It described a man in his mid-30s who owned a large cattle operation and needed a capable woman to manage his household. It did not ask for beauty. It asked for intelligence, practicality, and willingness to work hard. Amelia had all three in generous supply. She was 25 years old, full-figured, with dark brown hair. She wore pinned neatly at her neck and brown eyes that caught things quickly. She was not the kind of woman who spent long minutes in front of a mirror. She was the kind of woman who balanced ledger books at the kitchen table after supper and fixed what was broken before anyone else noticed it was broken. She had written back to the advertisement honestly. She described herself accurately, including her size, because she believed a man who would reject her for something as shallow as her figure was not a man worth deceiving and not a man worth marrying. 2 letters followed, then a formal agreement, then a train ticket. She arrived believing she was expected. She stepped off the train and looked down the platform, and there was no one there holding a sign with her name. She waited 20 minutes. A station boy found her eventually and told her a man was asking for her near the freight office. She followed him there. The man waiting was not Nathaniel Brooks. He was younger by at least a decade, with the same strong jaw and light blue eyes. She would later learn belonged to all the Brooks men, but softer, somehow soft, with the particular discomfort of someone who had been asked to do something unpleasant and was hoping to complete it quickly. His name was Thomas Brooks. He was Nathaniel's younger brother, and he introduced himself with a handshake that lasted half a second. "Miss Carter," he said. He did not offer to take her suitcase. "I'm afraid there's been a situation." He handed her an envelope. She opened it there, standing in the shadow of the freight office, with the sound of the train still hissing behind her, and read 4 sentences that ended her hope before she had a chance to set it down anywhere. "Dear Miss Carter, I regret to inform you that the arrangement discussed in our correspondence is no longer something I am prepared to honor. Circumstances have changed. I wish you safe travels. N. Brooks." She read it twice. Then she folded it and pressed it to her chest. "What circumstances?" she said. Thomas shifted his weight from one boot to the other. "He didn't say exactly." "He didn't say?" she repeated. "No, ma'am." She looked at Thomas Brooks for a long moment. He had the grace to look away. "He saw the description I sent," she said. It was not a question. Thomas said nothing, which was the same as saying yes. She nodded once. She understood. She had been honest about who she was, and someone had decided that honesty was inconvenient. That happened. She had seen it happen to other women. She had believed, perhaps naively, that it would not happen to her because she had been so careful, so straightforward, so precise. She had believed that a man who advertised for capability would be looking for capability. She had been wrong. "Is there a stagecoach leaving today?" she asked. "There's one leaving at noon," Thomas said. He looked relieved that she was not weeping. Most people she had noticed were relieved when she didn't weep. It made their guilt more manageable. "Thank you," she said. She meant it without warmth, which was the most honest way she could mean it. She picked up her suitcase and walked back toward the main street. Harlow Creek was a working town. Wide dirt roads, a general store, a post office, a livery stable, a church with a crooked steeple, and a saloon that appeared to be doing the best business of any of them. The people were the kind of people you found in any Wyoming Territory town in 1885. Ranchers and their wives cowboys on errands, merchants with pragmatic faces and careful eyes. They noticed Amelia because she was a stranger, and in small towns, strangers were noticed. Several of them had already heard something about a mail-order bride arriving on the morning train, because small towns also moved information faster than any telegraph. She could feel them watching. She kept her back straight and her pace even, and she did not look at any of them directly, because she did not trust what her face would do if she met eyes with someone who was watching her, the way she suspected they were watching her. She found the stage line office and paid for her ticket. The noon coach would take her as far as Cheyenne. From Cheyenne, she had enough money to reach Denver. After Denver, she would need to find work, but she had found work before, and she could find it again. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. She sat down on a bench outside the stage office with her suitcase between her feet and her hands folded in her lap and waited. That was when she heard the first voice. It came from two women standing near the dressmaker's shop across the street, and it came at the particular volume of people who want to be overheard. She doesn't look anything like what a Brooks Ranch bride ought to look like. Well, you can't blame Nathaniel. A man in his position has a certain image to maintain. She must have misrepresented herself in her letters. Either that or she was desperate enough to try anyway. Amelia kept her eyes forward. Her hands folded in her lap, tightened against each other until she could feel the pressure in her knuckles, but she kept them still, and she kept her face even, and she kept her breathing slow. She had not misrepresented herself. She had been the most honest woman who ever wrote a letter. A man passed on the boardwalk nearby and said something to his companion that included the phrase, "Not exactly what was advertised," and they both laughed, not even troubling to lower their voices. Amelia looked down at her hands. In Wichita, she had been good at her job. She had kept books for a dry goods merchant for 3 years, and before that, she had managed her father's farm through 2 bad drought seasons and brought the family through without losing the property. She had done those things. They were real. They were hers. A group of people who had known her for 11 minutes could not take them away. She repeated that to herself quietly in the privacy of her own mind, but it did not stop the heat behind her eyes. She would not cry here. She would not give this town the satisfaction. She would sit straight on this bench until noon, and she would get on that coach, and she would leave Harlow Creek behind her, and she would never think about it again. That was the plan. The plan lasted another 12 minutes. Then Thomas Brooks appeared in front of her. He had his hat in his hands, and he was twisting the brim in a way that told her he had been sent to deliver something else unpleasant. "Miss Carter," he said, "a few of the townspeople have been talking, and I just want to make sure you're all right." "I'm perfectly all right," she said. "Thank you for your concern. Because what happened this morning wasn't your fault, and I want you to know that some of us think Nathaniel handled this very—" "Mr. Brooks," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him completely. "I don't require reassurance from your family. I require the coach at noon. Is there something you need from me, or can I sit here in peace?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded. "I'll leave you alone," he said. "Thank you," she said. He walked away. She watched him go, and she thought almost dispassionately that Thomas Brooks was not a bad man. He was just weak in the specific way that men were weak when they deferred to stronger personalities and then felt guilty about the consequences. She wondered briefly what Nathaniel Brooks was like. She had built a picture from 2 letters, thoughtful, direct, not unkind. She had been wrong about that, apparently. Or perhaps the letters had been written by someone else, or perhaps he had changed his mind and lacked the courage to communicate it honestly. Either way, he was not the man she had thought she was traveling to meet, and that was the end of that. The noon hour approached. The stagecoach was brought around, and the driver began loading luggage. 3 other passengers emerged from the stage office, a traveling merchant, an older woman visiting relatives in Cheyenne, and a young clerk with ink-stained fingers who looked barely old enough to be on his own. None of them paid Amelia particular attention, and she was grateful for it. She picked up her suitcase. She was 3 steps from the coach door when the sound came, the hard, rhythmic beat of a horse moving fast through town. Not the casual canter of someone running an errand, but the urgent, purposeful pace of someone trying to get somewhere before something happened. Several people turned to look. Amelia did not turn. She kept walking toward the coach door. Wait. The voice was not Thomas's. It was larger than Thomas's. It came from behind her, and it carried a quality she recognized instinctively, the quality of someone who was accustomed to being heard, and was now using that quality not as authority, but as something closer to desperation. She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She stood with her hand almost touching the coach door, and she took one breath, slow and deliberate, and she told herself that whatever came next, she would meet it without losing herself. Then she turned. Nathaniel Brooks was still on his horse. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of permanent outdoor weathering that came from decades of real ranch work rather than supervisory observation. He was not what she had imagined. He was harder looking, more tired. His coat was dusty and his jaw was tight, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had guilt underneath it and something else on top. He dismounted in a single efficient movement and came toward her. She waited. The street she noticed had gone quiet in the particular way that small-town streets went quiet when something worth watching was happening. She could feel eyes on them from every direction. Nathaniel Brooks stopped 6 feet away from her. He looked at her the way you looked at something you needed to understand quickly and weren't sure you could. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Brooks," she said. A pause. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You do." He blinked. She suspected he had been prepared for various responses. Tears, accusations, relief, and simple agreement was not among them. "What happened this morning?" he started. "What happened this morning," she said, "is that your brother delivered a letter telling me our arrangement was canceled in front of a station full of strangers because you were not here to do it yourself. I am going to assume that you at least had the decency to be somewhere else when it happened, rather than standing around the corner waiting to see how I took the news." "I was at the North Pasture," he said. "I got back an hour ago, and Thomas told me what he'd done." "What he'd done on your instruction?" "On instruction I gave before I—" He stopped, started again. "I made a decision without thinking it through clearly. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened." "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I understand that you saw my description and changed your mind. That is your right. It is embarrassing for me, but it is your right, and I am not going to stand here and argue it. I'm going to get on this coach and go to Cheyenne." "I'd like to ask you not to," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'd like an explanation of why I shouldn't." He pulled off his hat. He held it at his side, and for a moment he looked not embarrassed exactly, but genuinely uncomfortable in the way of a man confronting something about himself he didn't particularly like. "Because I made a judgment that wasn't mine to make," he said. "Because Thomas told me what you said to him, and I thought a woman who walks through that kind of humiliation without falling apart, and doesn't ask for anything except to be left in peace, is not a woman I should be letting get on a coach to Cheyenne." "That's a very flattering observation," Amelia said. "It doesn't change what happened." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." A man on the boardwalk nearby laughed at something, and 2 women further down the street were watching with the concentrated attention of people who intended to discuss this conversation in detail later. Amelia was aware of all of it. She suspected Nathaniel was too. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I'm asking you to consider a different arrangement." She waited. "My ranch is in serious trouble," he said, and the directness of it surprised her. Not the words, but the quality of them. The way he said it without hedging or performing just laid the fact down plainly. "The accounts are a disaster. Workers are leaving." I can't figure out where the losses are coming from, and I don't have time to chase them myself because I'm running cattle operations 12 hours a day. I need someone capable of managing the household and the business records. Thomas can't do it. My housekeeper is 63 years old and barely manages the cooking. You're offering me employment, she said. I'm offering you 3 months at fair wages, a room in the main house, and full authority over household and ranch accounts. At the end of 3 months, you leave with whatever you've earned, and a reference letter I'll write myself. And the marriage arrangement is off the table unless you choose otherwise, he said. Completely your choice. No obligation, no expectation. She studied him. He did not look away, which she respected without quite trusting it. Why would I help you, she said, after what happened this morning? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't know that you would, but I think you might, because I don't think you're the kind of woman who walks away from something she can fix just because the situation is uncomfortable. It was, she thought, the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in months. She looked at the stagecoach. She looked at the ticket in her hand. She thought about Denver and finding work and starting over again in another strange city where nobody knew her and she knew nobody. She looked at Nathaniel Brooks. If I take this arrangement, she said, I require complete authority over the accounts. No one overrides my decisions regarding the household records without first presenting a documented reason. And if I discover something wrong, something seriously wrong, I will report it regardless of who is involved. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. I'll need a written contract. I'll have one drawn up before supper. And I want an apology delivered publicly, she said. Not to me privately, here, now, in front of these people. Something moved across his face. Respect possibly, discomfort certainly. He looked at the people watching from the boardwalks and storefronts, and she could see him calculating, and she was curious what he would decide. He turned to face the street. This morning, he said at a volume that carried clearly in both directions. Miss Carter was treated dishonorably. That was my fault. She came here in good faith and was met with cowardice. I am sorry for it. The street was very quiet. Amelia looked at Thomas Brooks, who was standing near the livery stable, with the expression of someone watching something unexpected and irreversible happen. She looked back at Nathaniel. I'll stay through the end of the summer, she said. Not a day longer than I choose. Fair enough, he said. She did not smile at him. She was not ready to smile at him. But she did release the coach door handle, and she did pick up her suitcase, and she followed Nathaniel Brooks away from the stagecoach and through the streets of Harlow Creek, while the entire town watched, and the whispers started immediately and built behind them like weather gathering on the horizon. She heard fragments as they passed. Can't believe he brought her back. She must have said something that worked on him. Give it a week before she's back on a coach east. Amelia kept walking. She had heard that kind of confidence before the specific certainty of people who had decided what the ending would be before the story started. She had spent her entire adult life being underestimated by people who thought they understood her situation better than she did. They were always wrong. She intended to be thorough about being right. Brooks Ranch was 4 miles outside of town. They rode in near silence, Nathaniel on his horse, and Amelia in a hired wagon he arranged for her luggage. She used the time to look at the land rather than at him, and the land told her something immediately. It was good land, deep grass country with water access and natural shelter, the kind of land that should have been producing abundantly. The fact that the ranch was struggling had nothing to do with geography. When they arrived, she sat in the wagon for a moment and looked at the main house. It was a large structure well built originally, but with the particular quality of a place that had been well maintained and then stopped being maintained. Shutters that needed repainting, a porch step that had been cracked and not replaced, a kitchen garden that someone had started and then given up on partway through the season. The housekeeper met them at the door. Her name was Mrs. Aldridge, and she was small and sharp-eyed and looked at Amelia the way a person looked at an unfamiliar tool when they weren't sure yet whether it would be useful. This is Miss Carter, Nathaniel said. She'll be managing the household and accounts for the next 3 months. She has full authority in both. Mrs. Aldridge looked at Amelia. Amelia looked back. Do you keep daily records of household expenditures? Amelia asked. I keep what Mr. Brooks asked me to keep, Mrs. Aldridge said. That's a no, Amelia said pleasantly. We'll start tomorrow morning. I'll need every receipt and ledger from the past 12 months pulled together tonight if possible. Mrs. Aldridge's chin came up slightly. That'll be a project. Yes, Amelia agreed. It will be. I appreciate your help with it. It was not a suggestion. Mrs. Aldridge appeared to understand that because she gave a short nod and went inside without further comment. Nathaniel was watching Amelia with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your accounts, she said to him. Where do you keep them? Office off the main hallway. I'd like to see them tonight, before supper if possible. I can show you now. Good, she said. The office was as she had expected from everything else she'd seen. A chaos dressed up as organization papers, sorted into piles that had a system behind them once, but had clearly suffered from months of being added to by someone who didn't know the system. There were 3 different ledger books, none of which appeared to agree with each other about the state of the ranch's finances. There were receipts stacked with no apparent organizing principle. There were invoices she could see from the doorway that were stamped overdue. She stood in the doorway and breathed through it. How long has it been like this? She said. Since my father died, Nathaniel said. He said it flatly without self-pity. 8 months ago. He kept all of this himself. I know cattle. I don't know this. She looked at him. You should have said that in the advertisement, she said. I know, he said. I can fix this, she said. It will take time, and I will need cooperation from your ranch foreman and access to every account without exception. You'll have it. I may find things you don't want to know. He held her gaze. I've been finding things I don't want to know for 8 months. At least you might find answers along with them. It was the second honest thing he had said to her. She was beginning to think that honesty might be his genuine quality. The real one underneath whatever failure of nerve had produced the morning's disaster. She filed that away without drawing conclusions from it. She set her bag down and picked up the nearest ledger. She worked until past midnight that first night. Nathaniel brought her coffee at 9 o'clock, set it on the desk without a word, and left without hovering. She appreciated the coffee. She appreciated more that he left without hovering. What she found in those first hours of reading was not reassuring. The ranch was losing money at a rate that should have been impossible given its size and the healthy cattle market of 1885. Expenses were running significantly higher than any reasonable ranch operation required. Supply orders were being placed and billed at prices that didn't match what she knew to be standard territory rates. And there was a pattern to the discrepancies. They clustered around certain suppliers, certain invoices, certain dates. She closed the ledger at midnight and sat with her hands flat on the desk and thought. She did not yet know exactly what she was looking at, but she knew it was not incompetence. Incompetence produced chaos that went in every direction. This had a shape to it. This went in one direction. Someone was stealing from Brooks Ranch. And they had been doing it long enough and carefully enough that they believed no one would ever notice. She picked up her pen and started a new page in the clean ledger book she had found in the desk drawer. She was going to make them very wrong about that. She worked until the candle burned low enough to make reading dangerous, and then she closed the books and went to the room Mrs. Aldridge had prepared for her and lay in the dark and thought about the morning, the train station, the letter, Thomas's uncomfortable handshake, the town watching her, Nathaniel stopping the coach. She thought about what he had said on the street, about judgment he wasn't entitled to make, about cowardice. She thought about the fact that he had said those things publicly with the whole town listening when he could easily have apologized privately and let people assume whatever they liked. She didn't know yet what to make of Nathaniel Brooks. She had known him for approximately 7 hours, half of which she had spent reading his ruined finances rather than observing him. What she knew was that he was direct, that he was uncomfortable with dishonesty, including his own, and that he worked hard in a genuine way rather than a supervisory way. She also knew that he had canceled a marriage arrangement based on her appearance, which told her something about him that those other qualities couldn't fully erase. She would work with what was real. She would fix what she could fix. She would stay her 3 months and leave with her wages and her reference letter and her dignity intact. That was the plan. She had learned something today about plans. She held this one more loosely. Tomorrow she would talk to the ranch foreman. She would begin mapping the pattern in the accounts. She would start learning the actual operations of the ranch, how many cattle, which pastures, which suppliers, which workers had been here longest, and which ones had been hired recently. She would be systematic. She would be thorough. And she would find out who was taking Nathaniel Brooks's money and why and how, and she would build a case so clear and documented that even the people in this town who had laughed at the train station would have to admit she had done something real. She closed her eyes. Sleep, when it came quickly. She had never been a person who lay awake worrying. She had always been a person who made a plan and then rested so she could execute it. The candle guttered out. Outside, far away, across the dark pastures, a coyote called once and went quiet. Brooks Ranch settled around her like something that was not yet hers, but might in time recognize her. She let herself sleep. She found the first real discrepancy on a Tuesday. It was her 4th day at Brooks Ranch, and she had spent all 4 of them the same way up before sunrise. Coffee standing at the kitchen window while Mrs. Aldridge started the stove, then straight to the office before anyone else was moving through the house. She had reorganized the filing system on day 1, created a master ledger on day 2, and spent day 3 cross-referencing 3 years of supply invoices against the cattle numbers Nathaniel had given her from memory. The number she found on Tuesday was $340. That was the difference between what the ranch had paid for winter feed supplies in November of the previous year and what the same quantity of feed would have cost from any other supplier in the territory. She checked it twice. She checked it a 3rd time with a different calculation method. The number stayed at $340 for 1 order, 1 month. She turned back through the invoices and found 7 more orders from the same supplier. A company called Harmon Valley Feed and Supply, spread across the previous 14 months. Each one was overpriced. Each one by a slightly different amount. Never enough to make any single invoice look outrageous on its own, but enough that when she added them together, she was looking at a total overpayment of just under $2,400. She put her pen down and looked at the wall. $2,400 was not a number you arrived at by accident. She heard boots on the porch, and then Nathaniel's voice in the hallway, talking to someone, his foreman from the sound of it, a man named Grady Cole, who had been running ranch operations for 6 years. She had met Grady on her 2nd day. He was tall and weathered and quiet, with the kind of eyes that measured everything without appearing to measure anything. He had been polite to her in the precise, minimal way of someone who had not yet decided what she was. She picked up the Harmon Valley invoices, stacked them in order, and walked to the hallway. Nathaniel was still in his coat, which meant he had just come in from the morning rounds. Grady was beside him with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I need 10 minutes." Nathaniel looked at the invoices in her hand. Something in his expression changed. Not alarm exactly, but a kind of readiness, like a man bracing for news he'd suspected was coming. "Grady," he said, "I'll find you after breakfast." Grady nodded and went. He glanced at Amelia as he passed, and she noticed the glance without showing it. She led Nathaniel into the office and closed the door. She laid the invoices out on the desk in chronological order and walked him through the numbers the same way she had walked herself through them methodically, without editorializing, letting the figures make the argument for themselves. He stood beside her and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not make excuses. He asked 2 questions, both of which were practical rather than defensive, and she answered them directly. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Harmon Valley Feed," he said. "Yes. My father set up that account 3 years ago." "Do you know the owner?" "Gerald Harmon. He and my father played cards together sometimes. He seemed—" Nathaniel stopped. "I never thought to question it." "Someone knew you wouldn't," she said. He looked at her. "You think it's deliberate. I think $2,400 in systematic overcharges across 14 months is not a billing error," she said. "I think someone knew your father was ill in his last year, and that the accounts weren't being watched carefully, and they used that. I think they may still be using it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. My father trusted Gerald Harmon. Yes, she said. That's exactly what made it work. He turned away from the desk. He stood with his back to her for a moment, and she could see from the set of his shoulders the particular quality of a man absorbing something that made him angry in a way he was disciplining himself not to show. Is there more? He said. I don't know yet, she said. I've only been through the feed and grain accounts so far. I still need to look at equipment, medical supplies for the cattle wage records and the contracts with the 2 trading companies you sell to. How long? Another week, probably. Maybe 10 days if some of the records are as incomplete as the ones I've already found. He turned back around. He was controlled now, the anger pushed down somewhere functional, where it could be used rather than expressed. What do you need from me? Access to every paper in this office, including anything your father kept separately. I found a locked drawer in the left cabinet. I'd like what's inside it. He looked at the cabinet. He looked like a man looking at something he hadn't wanted to think about. My father kept personal correspondence in there, he said. I won't read anything that isn't related to ranch finances, she said. You have my word on that. He held her gaze for a moment, then reached into his vest pocket and produced a small brass key and set it on the desk. She picked it up. One more thing, she said. I'd like you not to say anything to anyone about what I found. Not Grady, not Thomas, not Mrs. Aldridge, not yet. His eyes narrowed slightly. You think someone on the ranch is involved. I think I don't know enough yet to know who isn't, she said. Give me a few more days. He nodded. He left. She turned back to the desk and unlocked the drawer. It took her the rest of the morning and part of the afternoon to go through everything inside. Most of it was what Nathaniel had said. Letters, personal documents, a small book of his father's private observations that she closed and set aside without reading. But underneath all of it, at the very bottom of the drawer, she found a contract. It was a land purchase agreement, dated 8 months ago, right around the time of his father's death, for a parcel of Brooks Ranch land on the eastern boundary. The buyer's name was the Cowboy Land and Cattle Company. The sale price was roughly 1/3 of what that land was worth. And the signature on the seller's line was not Nathaniel's. It was someone trying to look like Nathaniel's. She sat very still for a long time. Then she went to find Nathaniel. She found him in the barn, not supervising, but actually working. One of the ranch horses had thrown a shoe, and he was with the animal holding its leg, with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He looked up when she came in and read something in her face immediately. Give me 5 minutes, he said. She waited. He finished. He washed his hands at the pump outside and came to her. She showed him the contract. She watched him read it. She watched his face go through something complicated. Disbelief. First, then anger, then something colder and more dangerous than anger. This is not my signature, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't. This land. He stopped. His voice had gone flat in a way that she recognized as the sound of someone keeping themselves very carefully controlled. This is the eastern parcel. It runs along the creek. It's the best grazing land on the property. I know, she said. The Cowboy Land and Cattle Company, he said. Do you know them? I've seen the name twice before in your records, she said. Once on a correspondence file I found in the office, and once on an invoice for cattle transport that was billed, but I can find no record of the transport actually occurring. He looked up from the contract. Someone forged my name. Yes. And tried to sell my land. Yes. And this has been in my father's desk for 8 months, and I didn't know. She let him sit with that for a moment, without rushing him through it. Nathaniel. She said it was the first time she had used his given name, and she noticed it, and so did he. This is not something you could have known. You didn't know what to look for. You were managing 3,000 acres of cattle operation while grieving. This is exactly how these things work. Who would do this? He said. Not rhetorically. A real question directed at her because she had been in the records and he hadn't. That's what I need to find out, she said. But whoever it is, they've been doing this carefully and for a long time. They knew your operation well enough to know which supplier accounts to manipulate and which land parcel to target. That means it's likely someone with direct access to your ranch affairs. Grady, he said. I don't know, she said. Possibly. Or it could be someone at the trading company, or someone at the county records office, or even Gerald Harmon himself, acting in connection with whoever runs Callaway. I need more time. You have it, he said. He handed the contract back to her. His hands were steady, but only because he was making them steady. What do I do in the meantime? Behave exactly as you normally would, she said. Don't change how you interact with anyone. If whoever did this realizes we're looking, they'll cover their tracks. He was quiet. You're asking me to sit on this, he said. For a few more days, she said. Yes. He looked out at the pasture. She could see him measuring the cost of it, the particular difficulty of a man who was accustomed to acting directly, being asked to be patient. I don't like it, he said. I know, she said. Do it anyway. The directness surprised him into something like a smile, not a full one. Just the corner of it, the involuntary kind that happened when something caught a person off guard. All right, he said. She went back to the office. She was there when supper was called, and she came to the table with ink on her fingers and her hair escaping its pins on one side, and the particular focused quiet of someone whose mind was still working on a different problem. Mrs. Aldridge set a plate in front of her without comment. Thomas was at the table, and he watched her the way he had watched her since she arrived cautiously, with a guilt he couldn't quite figure out how to put down. Nathaniel ate without talking much, and Amelia matched his pace, and the table had the feel of something in suspension. Everyone aware that things were different from how they had been, and not yet sure what the new arrangement meant. Thomas broke it. How are the accounts coming along? He said. He tried to make it sound casual, and didn't quite succeed. Amelia looked at him. Slowly, she said. There's a lot of ground to cover. Father always said the accounts were in good order, Thomas said. When did your father last review them personally? She asked. Thomas thought about it. A year before he died, maybe. He got too ill to... He paused. Too ill to manage much in the last year. I see, she said. Nathaniel was watching Thomas with the particular attention of a man who now had reason to look at everyone in his life slightly differently than he had before. Thomas didn't seem to notice. He went back to his supper. Later that evening, Amelia was walking back to the office from the kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee when she passed the front room and heard Thomas talking to someone outside on the porch. She stopped. Not because she was suspicious of Thomas. Specifically, she wasn't, not yet. But because she had trained herself this week to listen to everything. She's been in the accounts for 4 days straight, Thomas was saying. A pause as if the person he was talking to had responded, and she hadn't heard it. I don't know how much she's found. She doesn't say. Another pause. Yes, I'll let you know. Silence. Footsteps crossing the porch. The sound of someone going down the steps. Thomas came back inside and nearly walked into her. He startled. She looked at him steadily. Who were you talking to? She said. The color that came into Thomas's face was immediate and revealing. A ranch hand, he said. Just checking on the morning schedule. She nodded slowly. Of course, she said, and walked past him to the office. She set her coffee down on the desk and sat for a moment with her hands folded. Thomas. She didn't know what that conversation meant. It could be innocent. Ranch hands legitimately needed schedule information. But the specific content of what he'd said, she's been in the accounts for 4 days straight. I don't know how much she's found. That was not schedule conversation. That was surveillance conversation. She picked up her pen. She added a note to her private ledger, the small one she kept separate from the official records, the one she would not leave in the office. She wrote the date, the time, and what she had heard exactly as she had heard it. Then she turned back to the accounts and kept working. She found the next piece on Thursday. She had been working through the cattle transport records, the movement of animals between pastures and to market, when she found a series of entries that didn't match. Cattle numbers leaving the north pasture were consistently higher than cattle numbers recorded as arriving at the trading company on the other end. Not by huge amounts, never more than 8 or 10 animals per shipment, But across 2 years of records, the cumulative gap was significant. Cattle that were leaving the ranch and not arriving at market. Either they were dying in transit, which would have generated incident reports she couldn't find, or they were being diverted somewhere. She spread 3 years of transport records across the desk and started mapping the gap. Every single discrepancy occurred on shipments handled by the same transport contractor. A man named Pete Dunbar, who ran a small freighting operation out of a town called Sutter's Crossing, 12 miles east. She wrote his name in her private ledger and underlined it. She was still working at 10 o'clock when she heard a single set of footsteps pause outside the office door. The footsteps didn't knock. They waited a moment, then moved away. She got up quietly and looked into the hallway. No one there. She went back to the desk and moved her private ledger to the bottom of the locked cabinet drawer and locked it. She was being watched inside this house. She didn't know by whom. She didn't know how much they'd seen. But someone was paying attention to how much she was finding, and that meant she was getting close enough to something that someone felt the need to pay attention. Good, she thought. If she wasn't making someone nervous, she wasn't doing her job. The next morning, she asked Nathaniel for a private conversation before the rest of the house was up. They met in the kitchen at 5:30 before Mrs. Aldridge arrived to start the stove with cold coffee. Amelia had made herself, and the gray, pre-dawn quiet of a ranch house before work began. She told him about the transport records. She told him about Pete Dunbar. She told him about Thomas on the porch. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he sat with his forearms on the table and looked at the middle distance for a moment. She could see him working through the weight of it. Not just the financial loss, which was substantial, but the other thing, the human thing. The idea that he knew people who had eaten at his table, people whose names he had said out loud without suspicion, had been systematically dismantling what his father built. Thomas, he said. He said it very quietly. I don't know what Thomas is involved in, she said carefully. I know he reported to someone that I was going through the accounts. What he knew or didn't know about the rest of it I can't say yet. But you think he knew something? I think it's possible he was used as a source of information, she said, whether knowingly or not. Nathaniel looked at his hands. My father loved Thomas, he said. He worried about Thomas. He was always. Thomas was never as steady as my father wanted him to be. He borrowed money twice that I know of. There may have been other times. She let that sit. Who would Thomas have told, she said. If he was passing on information about the accounts, who would he be telling? Nathaniel thought. He drinks at the Harlow Creek Saloon. He has friends there, loose associations. Men who know men. He paused. Gerald Harmon has a son, Calvin. He and Thomas grew up together. She was very still. Gerald Harmon of Harmon Valley Feed and Supply, the company that had been systematically overcharging Brooks Ranch for 14 months. Calvin Harmon, she said. They've been friends since they were 12 years old, Nathaniel said. She got up and went to refill her coffee, even though she didn't need it, just to move for a moment, just to let the pattern settle into its full shape before she said it out loud. She came back and sat down. I think Calvin Harmon is the center of this, she said. I think he used his father's supply company as one mechanism, and Pete Dunbar's transport operation as another. I think he's had someone inside this ranch keeping him informed, possibly. Thomas, possibly someone else, possibly both. And I think the forged land sale to the Callaway Company is either Calvin directly or someone he's working with who wants the eastern parcel. Nathaniel said nothing. Do you know who owns the Callaway Land and Cattle Company? She said. I'd need to look into it. I'd like to do that, she said. But I'll need to go into town and access the county records office. I'll take you tomorrow. Alone, she said. I should go alone. If you come with me, people will pay attention. He considered that. She could see that it was difficult for him, not because he didn't trust her judgment, but because every instinct he had was to act directly, and being required to hold still while someone else moved was genuinely hard. All right, he said. Alone. And Nathaniel, she said. He looked at her. Don't let on with Thomas. Not yet. If he realizes we're onto the connection, he'll warn Calvin. You're asking me to sit at supper tonight and not say anything to my brother about the fact that he may have been helping someone rob us. Yes, she said simply. The muscle in his jaw worked. He looked at her across the table in the gray morning kitchen, and she looked steadily back at him. I keep underestimating you, he said. It came out quiet, and it wasn't a compliment exactly. It was something more honest than a compliment. It was a man confronting his own wrongness directly. Most people do, she said. He almost smiled. Is that something you're used to? It's something I've learned to use, she said. She went to town alone the next morning, taking the smaller ranch wagon and leaving before most of the house was awake. She spent 2 hours at the county records office, which was managed by a precise, unhurried man named Mr. Fitch, who clearly spent most of his days in a state of minimal disturbance and was mildly disconcerted by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. She found the registration for the Cowboy Land and Cattle Company. The registered owner was listed as a holding entity out of Cheyenne. But the correspondence address, the address to which all official communications were directed, was a post box in Harlow Creek, registered to Gerald Harmon. She sat with that for a moment in the records office chair. Gerald Harmon owned Cowboy Land and Cattle. Gerald Harmon's son Calvin had been Thomas Brooks's closest friend for 20 years. Gerald Harmon's feed company had been systematically overcharging Brooks Ranch since at least 14 months ago, and Gerald Harmon's company had been the intended buyer of the best grazing land on Brooks Ranch at 1/3 its actual value using a forged signature. It was not complicated once you could see the whole of it. It was actually quite clean. A man who had been close enough to the Brooks family to attend card games, who had a son embedded in Nathaniel's social orbit, who ran a supply company with regular legitimate access to the ranch accounts. He had built a mechanism over years, patient and incremental, designed to bleed the ranch slowly until it either collapsed or was desperate enough to sell. He had not counted on someone coming in and reading every invoice. She thanked Mr. Fitch and drove back to the ranch. She was 2 miles outside of town when a rider came up fast behind her on the road and pulled alongside. She did not recognize him. He was young and had the kind of face that practiced looking like it wasn't doing what it was doing. He rode even with her for a moment, without speaking, just looking at her from the saddle. Miss Carter, he said. She kept her eyes on the road. I don't believe we've met. Calvin Harmon, he said. She felt something go very quiet and very careful inside her. She did not show it. What can I do for you, Mr. Harmon? She said. I heard you've been spending a lot of time in the Brooks Ranch accounts, he said. He said it pleasantly, as if they were discussing the weather. That's correct, she said. That's what I was hired to do. Must be a lot of work, he said. Going through all those old records. It's thorough work, she said. But not particularly complicated once you know what you're looking at. A pause. Something shifted in the pleasantness of his face. Not quite enough to call threatening, but enough. Nathaniel's lucky to have someone so dedicated, he said. I think so, she agreed. I just wanted to say, he said, that I hope you're settling in all right. It can be hard coming into a place where you don't know anyone, not having anyone to rely on. She understood the shape of that sentence. The part that mattered was the last piece, not having anyone to rely on. She looked at him for the first time. I rely on myself, Mr. Harmon, she said. I always have. It's a very reliable arrangement. She flicked the reins and the wagon moved forward. He didn't follow her. She didn't look back. But she drove the remaining 2 miles with her hands very steady on the reins and her mind moving fast and sure as water finding downhill, cataloging what he knew and when he must have learned it and how quickly he was now going to move. Not quickly enough, she thought. She pulled into the ranch yard and found Nathaniel in the yard before she had the wagon fully stopped. He had heard her coming. He read her face when she climbed down. You found something, he said. I found everything, she said. And Calvin Harmon just stopped me on the road to tell me to stop looking. Nathaniel went very still. What did he say? Nothing specific. Nothing you could hold in a court. But the meaning was clear. She looked at him. They know I've been in the records, which means someone told them. Today, while I was in town. They both thought the same name at the same time. Thomas. "We need to move fast," she said. "Everything I've found, I need to write it up completely documented with every source record, and we need to take it to the territorial sheriff before Calvin has time to make anything disappear." "How long?" "Long," he said. 2 days, she said. "I can have everything documented in 2 days." "Then I'll keep Thomas close," he said. "I'll find reasons to keep him here at the ranch and away from town." She nodded. She was already walking toward the office. "Amelia," he said. She stopped. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the yard with the afternoon light behind him, and he looked for just a moment like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and had just registered that someone was standing on the other side of it. "Thank you," he said. "Not for effect, not as a courtesy, as a plain, undecorated fact." She held his gaze for one moment. "Let me finish what I started," she said. She went inside. She worked the rest of that day, and through most of the night, compiling everything she had found into a single clear documented account. Every overcharged invoice, every transport discrepancy, every record of the forged land sale, the county registration, connecting Gerald Harmon to Callaway Land and Cattle, the dates, the amounts, the patterns. She wrote it in the clean, plain language of someone trained in accounting rather than legal argument, because she knew that a clear ledger was more persuasive than any rhetoric. She worked until 2 in the morning, and then she went to bed, and she lay in the dark and listened to the quiet of the house and the distant sounds of the ranch at night, and she thought about Calvin Harmon on the road, with his face arranged into pleasantness, while he told her she was alone. She had been alone before. She was not afraid of it. What Calvin Harmon did not understand, what most people in this town had not understood since the morning she stepped off that train, was the difference between a woman who was alone and a woman who was beaten. She had never been beaten. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would finish the documentation. The day after they would go to the sheriff. And Calvin Harmon was going to learn the difference too. She finished the documentation at 7 in the morning. She had been at the desk since 2 a.m., working by candlelight while the rest of the house slept, and when she set down her pen and looked at the completed report, 41 pages of organized evidence, every number sourced, every date, cross-referenced, every discrepancy, documented with its corresponding original invoice, she felt something settle in her chest that was quieter and more solid than satisfaction. It was certainty. The particular certainty of a person who has done something correctly and knows it. She stacked the pages, squared the edges, and placed them in the leather folder she had found in the bottom of the office cabinet. Then she locked the folder in the cabinet drawer with the brass key Nathaniel had given her, and put the key in the pocket of her dress rather than leaving it on the desk. She washed her hands. She went to the kitchen and started coffee, because Mrs. Aldridge wouldn't be up for another hour. She stood at the kitchen window and drank a cup in the gray morning quiet and thought through everything one more time. Not because she doubted the evidence, but because a careful person checked their thinking the same way they checked their arithmetic, not from fear, but from discipline. The picture was complete, and it was damning. Gerald Harmon operating through his son Calvin and using Thomas Brooks as an unwitting. She hoped unwitting source of inside information had been systematically extracting money and resources from Brooks Ranch for at minimum 14 months. The overcharged supply invoices totaled $2,400. The missing cattle based on the transport discrepancies she had mapped across 2 years represented a loss somewhere in the range of $4,000 to $5,000 at current market prices. The forged land sale, if it had been successfully completed, would have transferred $12,000 worth of property for approximately $4,000. Total estimated theft, completed and attempted somewhere north of $19,000. Against a ranch that was already struggling after a difficult transition year, that was not petty crime. That was an organized campaign designed to break Nathaniel Brooks financially and force a distress sale of the land the Harmons actually wanted. She heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Nathaniel came into the kitchen. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well, which she suspected was accurate. He looked at her standing there with her coffee, and the particular steadiness she wore when she had made up her mind about something, and he poured himself a cup without speaking and sat down at the table. "It's done," she said. He looked up. 41 pages, she said. Everything documented. We can go to the sheriff today. He set his cup down. Today. The longer we wait, the more time Calvin has to move things around. He knows I've been in the records. He stopped me on the road specifically to measure how much I'd found. If he thinks I found everything, he'll start making things disappear. Does he think you found everything? I don't know, she said. I was careful not to show it when he talked to me. But I don't trust that I was careful enough. He's not stupid. No, Nathaniel agreed. Calvin Harmon has never been stupid. Ambitious and patient and willing to work slowly, she said. Those are the dangerous ones. He was quiet for a moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. Then he said, Thomas came to find me last night. Late. He was agitated. He wanted to know what you'd found in the accounts. She waited. I told him the accounts were in worse shape than expected, and that you were still working through them. I didn't tell him anything specific. He paused. He asked 3 times. 3 times, she repeated. He kept finding new ways to phrase it. I kept giving him the same non-answer. He looked at her. He's scared of something, Amelia. I've known my brother my whole life. He was scared last night. She sat down across from him. Nathaniel, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is difficult. He met her eyes. Go ahead. Is it possible that Thomas knew what the Harmons were doing and participated willingly? Not just as a source of information, but as an active participant. The question sat between them. She watched him work through it. Not the emotional part, which was clearly difficult, but the factual part, the honest inventory of his brother's character and history, and the specific behaviors he had observed. He was trying to answer her question with the truth, rather than with what he wanted to be true. And she respected him for the effort, even though she could see it cost him. I don't know, he said finally. I think Thomas is the kind of person who starts something small because he needs money and tells himself it won't go further, and then it goes further, and he doesn't know how to stop it, and then he's in too deep to get out without destroying himself. I think that's possible. I also think he may genuinely not have known the full extent of what he was feeding information into. Either way, we can't warn him before we go to the sheriff. I know that. And either way, when this comes out, I know that too, he said. She nodded. She stood up. We should leave within the hour. I want to be in the sheriff's office before the Harmons have any chance to... The sound of a horse coming into the yard fast stopped her. Nathaniel was up and at the door before she finished the thought. She followed him. The rider was one of the younger ranch hands, a boy of 19 named Eli, and he had pushed his horse hard enough that the animal was blowing. He was down from the saddle before it fully stopped. Mr. Brooks, he said. He was breathing like he'd been running himself. The north fence line, someone cut it last night. 40, maybe 50 head got through into the creek valley, and we can't get them back without the footings bad down there after the rains, and 2 of the older cows are already stuck. Grady's down there now, but he says he needs you. Nathaniel turned to Amelia. She saw immediately what he was working through: the sheriff, the documentation, the ticking clock of what Calvin Harmon might be doing right now against 50 cattle stuck in a creek valley and 2 animals that might die if he didn't go. Go, she said. The sheriff. I'll go, she said. I'll take the documentation to the sheriff myself. You go deal with your cattle. He started to say something. Nathaniel, she said. I have been handling difficult situations by myself since before I ever heard of Wyoming territory. Go. He held her gaze for one moment. Then he turned to Eli. Get my horse saddled. To Amelia. The sheriff's name is Braddock. Tell him Nathaniel Brooks sent you. Show him everything. I will, she said. And Amelia. He stopped. He was already moving, and he stopped, and he looked at her with the full weight of someone who was trusting a person completely and knew it. Be careful. If Calvin thinks you're going to the law, I'll take the back road into town, she said. Through the old Miller property. Nobody uses it. He stared at her. How do you know about the Miller property road? I asked Mrs. Aldridge on my second day, she said. I like to know all the ways in and out of a place. He looked at her for one more moment, with an expression that was several things at once, something that might have been admiration, and something that was definitely gratitude, and something underneath both of those that was newer and less defined, and that neither of them had time to look at directly. Then he went. She went inside, got the folder from the locked cabinet, put it under her arm, pinned her hat, and was in the wagon within 15 minutes. She took the back road. It added 20 minutes to the trip, but it kept her off the main road between the ranch and town, which she decided was worth 20 minutes of anybody's time. She drove steadily and watched the land around her and kept her breathing even and her mind organized. She was 2 miles from town when she came around a long bend in the road and found a wagon stopped across the narrow track, effectively blocking it. Gerald Harmon was sitting on the seat of the wagon. He was not a large man. He was perhaps 60, with a careful face and the kind of unhurried manner that belonged to men who had learned that patience was more effective than force. He had white in his hair and steady hands, and he looked at Amelia with the particular expression of someone who had prepared for this conversation. She stopped her wagon. She did not get out. She held the reins and looked at him. "Miss Carter," he said. "What a coincidence." "Mr. Harmon," she said, "your wagon seems to be in my way." "So it does," he said pleasantly. "I'm afraid the wheel's given me some trouble. I don't suppose you'd have time to wait while I see to it." He did not move. He made no gesture towards any wheel. The wagon was perfectly stationary and perfectly undamaged, and they both knew the wheel story was a formality. "I'm in some hurry," she said. "I imagine you are," he said. "I heard you've been doing quite thorough work up at the Brooks place. Nathaniel's lucky to have someone so capable helping him sort through his father's papers." "His father kept excellent records," she said. Something shifted in Gerald Harmon's face. Microscopic, controlled. "Did he?" "Very detailed," she said. "The kind of records that hold up well when someone goes looking." He looked at her. She looked at him. The road was very quiet, and they were 2 miles from town, and nobody knew she had come this way except Nathaniel. And Nathaniel was in a creek valley with 50 cattle. She understood what Gerald Harmon wanted her to feel. He wanted her to feel isolated. He wanted her to feel the weight of 2 miles of empty road and a blocked wagon, and a man whose patience had made him very comfortable with waiting. She was familiar with the technique. She had seen it used on other women. She had never found it particularly effective on herself. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "I've been keeping accounts my entire adult life. I know what a ledger tells you about a person. It tells you what they value and what they're willing to do to get it and how long they're willing to wait for it." She looked at him steadily. "You've been very patient. I'll give you that." Gerald Harmon said nothing. "Move your wagon," she said. A pause. Then, slow and deliberate, he picked up his reins. He moved the wagon to the side of the road. He did it without expression, and she understood that the move was its own kind of message. He was letting her go. Not because she had won anything, but because blocking a road was crude, and he had other ways. She drove past him without looking back. She felt his eyes on her until the road curved and he was out of sight. She breathed then, a long, controlled exhale that let out the tension she had held for that entire conversation, without showing it. She drove the rest of the way to town at a pace that was slightly faster than necessary. Sheriff Braddock was a man of about 50, with a deliberate way of moving that spoke of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by urgency and had learned to trust careful information more than excited people. He looked at Amelia when she came through his office door and said, Nathaniel Brooks had sent her, and he looked at the folder she set on his desk, and he said, "Sit down, Miss Carter," in the tone of a man preparing to actually listen. She sat. She walked him through it, the same way she had walked Nathaniel through it methodically, without drama, letting the numbers do the work. She showed him the invoices. She showed him the transport records and the cattle discrepancy map. She showed him the forged land sale contract. She showed him the county registration linking Gerald Harmon to Callaway land and cattle. Braddock read everything slowly. He asked precise questions. She answered precisely. Twice he went back to re-examine a document she had already put aside, which told her he was taking it seriously enough to double-check rather than just moving forward on momentum. When she finished, he closed the folder and put his hands flat on it. "This is serious work," he said. "Yes," she agreed. It is. You're an accountant by training. I'm trained in household and business accounting. I managed books for a merchant in Wichita for 3 years and my family's farm operation before that. And you put this together in how long? 9 days, she said. He looked at her. 9 days. I had complete access to the records and nothing else to do, she said. It wasn't as difficult as it looks once you know where to look. And what made you know where to look? The numbers had a shape, she said. Honest mistakes look chaotic. This had a pattern. Patterns mean intention. Braddock was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to need to keep these documents. I made copies, she said. She opened her bag and produced a second equally complete set. One for you. The originals stay with me until you formally receive them as evidence. He looked at her copies. He looked at her. Nathaniel Brooks is lucky to have you looking at his books, he said. Several people have said something like that to me recently, she said. It's more interesting than it used to be coming from the people who said it first. Something moved in Braddock's expression that was almost a smile. I'll need Nathaniel here to make a formal complaint. He'll be in this afternoon, she said. We expected that. He was dealing with a ranch emergency this morning, I suspect not an accidental one. Braddock looked up sharply. Someone cut his north fence line last night, she said. 50 head through into the creek valley. It kept him occupied this morning while I came to town alone. You think the fence was cut deliberately, to split you up? I think it's an interesting coincidence that it happened the night after Calvin Harmon stopped me on the road to measure what I knew. She folded her hands. I don't believe in interesting coincidences. Braddock leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Neither do I, he said. He stood up. He put on his hat. I'm going to ride out to the Harmon property this afternoon with my deputy and have a conversation. I want Nathaniel in here by 2 o'clock. I'll send word, she said. She stood to go. Miss Carter, he said. She turned. Don't go anywhere alone until this is sorted, he said. Gerald Harmon is a patient man. Patient men get dangerous when they feel time running out. I noticed that, she said. She walked out of the sheriff's office into the main street of Harlow Creek and directly into Thomas Brooks. I was standing on the boardwalk 6 feet from the sheriff's office door, and he had the look of a man who had come somewhere with a purpose and arrived to find the purpose already in motion. He stared at her. She stared at him. In his hand was a piece of paper. She could see from 2 feet away that it was a letter already opened, and from the angle she could see enough of the handwriting to recognize it as not Thomas's own. Thomas, she said carefully. What did you tell him? Thomas said. His voice was low and unsteady. What did you just tell Braddock? That's between me and the sheriff. Amelia. He grabbed her arm. Not violently, desperately, which was worse in its way because desperation was harder to be angry at. You don't understand. If Braddock goes to Gerald Harmon, if Calvin thinks I told you. Let go of my arm, she said quietly. He released it immediately. He looked at his own hand as if it had acted without his permission. Thomas, she said, what is in that letter? He looked at the paper in his hand. He looked at her. And something in his face broke open, not dramatically, not in a way that made a scene, but in the quiet, exhausted way of someone who had been holding something together by force of will for a very long time and had just run out of will. Calvin sent it this morning, he said. After you left the ranch. He held it out. She took it. She read it. It was short. 4 sentences, no signature, but the meaning was exact and precise. The woman has found the records. Deal with her, or we both go down. You know what your brother will do when he finds out your part in this. There is still a way out that doesn't end you. She folded the letter. What is your part in this, Thomas? She said. He closed his eyes. He looked suddenly much younger than he was. I didn't know what I was doing. Calvin asked me questions about the ranch, about the accounts, about which suppliers we used, about when Nathaniel checked the books. He said he was thinking about expanding his family's business and needed to understand the territory market. I believed him. He opened his eyes. I believed him for 6 months. And then I found a letter. At Calvin's house when I was there for supper. I shouldn't have read it, but I did, and I understood what the questions had been for. And you didn't tell Nathaniel. I went to Calvin. I told him I wanted nothing more to do with it, and I wanted him to stop. His voice was flat with old shame. He told me that if I said anything, he would produce evidence that I had been a willing participant from the beginning. He had letters where I answered his questions written in my own hand. Without context, they looked like exactly what he said they were. He threatened you, she said. He had me, Thomas said. That's the difference. A threat implies you have a choice. I didn't have a choice. I had Nathaniel's whole opinion of me on one side, and Calvin's evidence on the other, and He stopped. I kept quiet. I told myself that as long as I didn't give him any more information, I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. She looked at him for a long moment. Thomas, she said, the letter you told me about on the porch, 2 nights ago, the ranch hand checking on the schedule. He looked away. That was Calvin's man. I told him you were going through the accounts. I know I did wrong. I know it. She breathed out slowly. She thought about what Nathaniel had said that morning. Thomas is the kind of person who starts something small and then doesn't know how to stop. She thought it was probably accurate. She also thought it didn't change what had happened. Both of those things could be true simultaneously. Come with me back to the sheriff, she said. Amelia, Thomas. Her voice was quiet, but absolute. The only thing that separates you from Calvin Harmon right now is whether you tell the truth voluntarily or wait for it to come out anyway. You have approximately 2 hours before Sheriff Braddock reaches the Harmon property. That is the window in which telling the truth voluntarily still means something. He looked at her with the wide-cornered look of a man who had been out of good options for a long time and had just been shown that the window on the last remaining one was closing. Will Nathaniel, he started. I don't know what Nathaniel will do, she said honestly. That's between you and your brother. But I will tell you this. I have watched Nathaniel Brooks operate for 2 weeks, and I believe he is a man who can separate what a person did from why they did it. I can't promise you what he'll say, but I think he deserves to hear it from you rather than from a sheriff's report. Thomas looked at the letter in her hand. That's Calvin's handwriting, he said. He was stupid to write it down. Patient men who are running out of time get sloppy, she said. It's one of their vulnerabilities. She went back into the sheriff's office. Thomas followed her. She stood at the wall while Thomas sat down across from Braddock and began to talk, and she listened to him tell everything. The questions Calvin had asked, the letters he had written in response the moment he had found the incriminating letter at Calvin's house, the threat that followed the information he had passed most recently. He was precise, and he was complete, and he did not try to minimize his own culpability, which Amelia thought took a certain kind of courage from a man who was clearly frightened. Braddock listened with the same careful attention he had given her. He took notes. He asked questions. He received Calvin's letter as evidence. When Thomas finished, Braddock said, "You understand, I'll need a sworn statement." "Yes," Thomas said. "And you understand that a sworn statement may still result in charges depending on what the territorial prosecutor determines." "Yes," Thomas said. "And you came in voluntarily." "I came in because she made me understand I was out of time to do anything else," Thomas said. Braddock glanced at Amelia. "I'll take that as voluntarily," he said. She waited in the street while Thomas gave his sworn statement. She stood in the ordinary noise of Harlow Creek wagons, passing people going about their business, a dog barking somewhere, and she thought about the morning with the particular quality of attention she brought to things she wanted to remember accurately. Gerald Harmon on the blocked road. Braddock reading her documents. Thomas's face breaking open on the boardwalk. She thought about the forged signature. 14 months of overcharges. Cattle walked off in the night. A dead man's papers used against his son. She thought about the fact that none of it had been visible until someone who knew what patterns looked like had sat down in a quiet office and read every piece of paper without exception. She felt something she didn't entirely have a name for. Not triumph exactly. Closer to the particular satisfaction of a repair done correctly, The feeling of a thing that was wrong, being made right, not by force, but by precision. Nathaniel arrived at 1:30, having gotten her message via Eli. He came in riding hard and slightly dusty from the Creek Valley work, and he looked at Amelia standing outside Braddock's office, and then at the office door, and then back at Amelia. "Thomas is inside," she said. He went still. "Thomas." "He came to me on the street. Calvin sent him a letter this morning, a threatening one. Thomas made a decision." She paused. "It was the right decision for what it's worth." Nathaniel looked at the office door for a long moment. She could see everything moving through him. The anger, the grief, the complicated love of a man for a brother who had failed him in a way that could have cost him everything. "He knew," Nathaniel said. His voice was steady and flat. "He knew, and he didn't tell me. He was trapped, and he made bad choices trying to get untrapped," she said. "He also in the end walked into the sheriff's office and told the truth because it was the right thing to do. Both of those things are true." Nathaniel looked at her. "You're defending him." "I'm describing him," she said. "What you do with it is your business." He was quiet. Then he went inside. She stayed in the street. She did not know what passed between the brothers in that office. She heard no raised voices which told her something about Nathaniel's self-discipline that she had already suspected was considerable. They were in there for 20 minutes. When they came out, Thomas looked like a man who had been through something difficult and was still standing, and Nathaniel looked like a man who had added something heavy to a load he was already carrying and had decided to carry it anyway. Neither of them looked at each other. But when Thomas stumbled slightly on the step, Nathaniel caught his arm. He didn't say anything. He just caught him and let go, and that small silent steadiness told her more about Nathaniel Brooks than any conversation she had witnessed. She looked away. It felt private in a way she wanted to respect. Braddock came out behind them. "I'm riding to the Harmon place in an hour with my deputy and a warrant," he said to Nathaniel. "I want you to stay in town until I come back." "And Calvin," Nathaniel said. "If the warrant holds up against what I find, we'll have Calvin Harmon in a cell by tonight," Braddock said. "Gerald Harmon, too, if the forgery charge sticks the way your records say it does." He looked at Amelia. "Miss Carter," he said, "you did fine work today." "I did my job," she said. "Some people," Braddock said, "do their job in a way that's indistinguishable from something considerably more than that." He went to get his horse. The three of them, Nathaniel, Thomas, and Amelia, stood on the boardwalk in front of the sheriff's office in the main street of Harlow Creek, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then Nathaniel turned and looked at the town around them. The same town that had watched Amelia and humiliated at the train station 12 days ago. The same storefronts and boardwalks and faces that had made their assumptions and spoken them at a volume designed to carry. And he said very quietly, "I want to buy you dinner, not as an obligation, because I don't know how else to start saying what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything beyond my wages," she said. "That's not what I mean," he said. She looked at him. The afternoon light was long and golden, and the street was full of ordinary life, and Nathaniel Brooks was looking at her without any of the calculation or discomfort or social performance that people usually arrange their faces into when they looked at her. He was just looking at her. She thought about 12 days ago. She thought about the folded letter and the stagecoach door and the town watching. She thought about the fact that she had almost been on that coach to Cheyenne, and that what had stopped her was not his apology or his offer of employment, but her own refusal to let someone else's poor judgment become her surrender. "Dinner," she said. "Fine." But even as she said it, she knew that what was waiting for them was not finished. Braddock was riding to the Harmon property with a warrant. Gerald Harmon had moved a wagon across a road to block her this morning. Calvin Harmon had sent a threatening letter to Thomas before 10 o'clock. These were not the actions of men who were going to receive a warrant quietly. Whatever was coming next was coming soon. She could feel it the same way she could feel a pattern in a ledger, that specific quality of pressure that built before something broke. She walked with Nathaniel toward the hotel dining room, and she kept her face easy and her pace steady and her mind very, very awake. The numbers were all in order. The next question was how the men who had written them would respond when the accounting came due. Dinner lasted 40 minutes. Not because either of them wanted it to end, but because Braddock's deputy came through the hotel dining room door at the 35-minute mark with a look on his face that ended all conversation at the table immediately. Name was Deputy Holt, and he was young enough that his face hadn't yet learned to hide what he was thinking. What he was thinking right now was urgency mixed with something that looked like controlled alarm. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "Sheriff Braddock needs you, both of you." Nathaniel was already standing. "What happened?" "Calvin Harmon isn't at the property," Holt said. "Gerald Harmon is, and the sheriff has him, but Calvin nobody's seen him since this morning. His horse is gone, and there's a saddlebag missing from the barn." Amelia set down her fork and stood up. "He ran," Nathaniel said. "Looks that way," Holt said. "Sheriff wants to know if there's anywhere you think he might go, someone he'd run to." Nathaniel looked at Amelia. She was already thinking. "The transport contractor," she said. "Pete Dunbar, in Sutter's Crossing." Holt looked at her. "Dunbar has been part of this from the beginning," she said. "He's been diverting cattle on Calvin's behalf for 2 years. If Calvin needs to disappear quickly, he needs someone who already has reason to help him and means to move him." She turned to Holt. "How far is Sutter's Crossing from the Harmon property?" 12 miles east, Holt said. "Maybe 2 hours on a good horse." "When did Calvin's horse go missing?" "Gerald Harmon said he last saw Calvin at breakfast, 7 this morning." Amelia looked at the clock on the dining room wall. It was 3:30. "He's been gone 8 hours, she said. "If he went to Dunbar, he's already there. If Dunbar is helping him move further east." "We need to ride now," Nathaniel said to Holt. "Sheriff's already sent a wire to the Sutter's Crossing marshal," Holt said. "But he wants you there, and—" He glanced at Amelia with the slight uncertainty of a young deputy who wasn't sure how to phrase the next part. "He wants Miss Carter, too, for the documents." She was already reaching for her bag. They rode to the Harmon property first, where Braddock was waiting in the yard with Gerald Harmon sitting on the porch steps with his wrists in irons and the particular expression of a man whose patience had finally run out of road. Gerald looked at Amelia when she arrived, and the look he gave her was not angry. It was, if anything, almost resigned, which she found more unsettling than anger would have been. Braddock met them at the gate. "Gerald Harmon is cooperating," he said, low and direct. "He's given me a full account. Calvin ran the operation. Gerald provided the company structure and the supplier access, but according to Gerald, Calvin was the architect." "Do you believe him?" Nathaniel said. "Mostly," Braddock said. "Gerald is 62 years old, and he knows the difference between a man who goes to prison as a principal and a man who goes as a cooperating secondary. He's making a practical calculation." He looked at Amelia. "The documents you put together this morning are solid enough that even with Calvin gone, the case against Gerald holds. I want to make sure of the Callaway registration before we go further. Can you walk me through it one more time with Gerald present?" "Yes," she said. They went to the porch. Gerald Harmon watched Amelia approach, and he said, addressing her directly for the first time since the road this morning, "You move faster than Calvin thought you would." "Most people underestimate how quickly a clear ledger tells its story," she said. "Did you cut the fence line at Brooks Ranch last night?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "That was Calvin's idea." "But someone did it." "One of his men," Gerald said. "Not mine. Did you know he was going to send that letter to Thomas this morning?" A pause. Something moved through Gerald's face that looked like the first honest regret she had seen from him. "No," he said. "Calvin moved faster than I expected too. When I saw what he'd written, I knew it was over." She looked at him for a moment. "You knew it was over, and you sat on your porch and waited." "I'm 62 years old," he said again. "And I have been lying to my neighbors for 14 months, and my best friend's son had his father's signature forged on a land deal, and I—" He stopped. He looked at his hands in their irons. "I was tired." She believed him. She did not feel sorry for him, but she believed him. The wire from Sutter's Crossing came back to the Harmon property by 6 o'clock. The marshal there had found Pete Dunbar at his freighting barn. Dunbar had been in the process of hitching a wagon with what appeared to be a significant amount of travel provisions. Calvin Harmon had been with him. Both men were now in custody in Sutter's Crossing, pending transfer to Harlow Creek. Braddock read the wire and handed it to Nathaniel without a word. Nathaniel read it once. He folded it. He put it in his coat pocket. He said nothing for a long moment, and Amelia stood beside him and let the silence be what it needed to be, because she could feel the weight of everything he was carrying. The theft, the forged document, his brother's involvement, his father's memory, the land that had almost been taken settling into him all at once, now that the running part was over. "Your father's land is safe," she said. Not as comfort exactly. As a fact he deserved to hear stated plainly. "Because of you," he said. "Because of the records he kept," she said. "He was meticulous. Even in the last year when he was ill, he kept everything. If he hadn't, I wouldn't have had anything to work from." Nathaniel looked at her. "That's a generous way to frame it." "It's an accurate way," she said. He looked away toward the darkening sky. "My father would have liked you," he said. He valued precision in a person. He didn't trust prettiness. He used to say that a pretty argument was usually hiding an ugly fact. He paused. He would have spotted you as someone to trust within 5 minutes. She didn't respond immediately. The statement landed somewhere quiet in her chest, and she let it settle without examining it too closely. "We should get back to town," she said. "There will be statements to finalize tonight, and Braddock will need the original documents deposited as formal evidence." They spent the next 3 hours in the sheriff's office. Nathaniel gave his formal statement. Amelia deposited every original document and signed the accompanying inventory. Thomas came in at 8 o'clock, looking like a man who had spent the afternoon making peace with something painful, and gave a supplementary statement that Braddock said would likely be sufficient for prosecutorial purposes. The wire confirming Calvin and Dunbar's transfer was expected by morning. It was past 10 o'clock when they finally left the sheriff's office and stood on the empty main street of Harlow Creek. Thomas had gone ahead. Braddock had his paperwork. The town was quiet in the way of places where the business of the day was complete. Nathaniel stood beside her on the boardwalk, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You're 3 months," he said. She looked at him. "You said you'd stay through the end of the summer. Not a day longer than you choose." He was looking at the street rather than at her. "It's been 2.5 weeks." "I'm aware of how long it's been," she said. "The accounts aren't finished," he said. "There'll be a recovery process working with the territory court to reclaim the losses from the Harmon estate. That'll require someone who knows the documentation." "Yes," she agreed. "It will. And the ranch operations need restructuring. Grady's a good foreman, but he's not an accountant, and the supply contracts will all need to be renegotiated with new vendors." "Also true," she said. He turned and looked at her. "I'm not very good at this," he said. "At what?" she said. "At..." He stopped. He tried again. "At asking for something I need from someone I've already treated badly. There isn't a clean way to do it." She was quiet for a moment. "Nathaniel," she said, "you stood in this street on my second day here and apologized publicly for what happened at the train station. You gave me complete authority over your accounts and kept your word about it absolutely. You have treated me since the morning you stopped that coach with more consistent respect than most people have managed across much longer acquaintances." She looked at him. "That doesn't erase the first morning, but it's not nothing." "It's not enough," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't. Not yet." He heard the yet. She could see it. Something in the set of his face shifted slightly. Not hope exactly, but the acknowledgement of a possibility. "Then I'll keep working on it," he said. She picked up her bag. "Drive me back to the ranch," she said. "I want to be at the desk early tomorrow. The recovery documentation will need to start immediately." He almost smiled. "You're already thinking about tomorrow's work." "I'm always thinking about tomorrow's work," she said. "It's one of my better qualities." They rode back to the ranch in the dark. Mostly quiet, and the quiet was comfortable in a way that surprised her. Not the silence of strangers or the silence of people with nothing to say, but the specific comfortable silence of two people who had done something difficult together and didn't need to fill the space with words. The next morning, Harlow Creek woke up to the news. It moved the way. News moved in small towns, not like a wave, but like fire jumping from point to point. each new person adding their own oxygen to it. Calvin Harmon arrested in Sutter's Crossing. Pete Dunbar in custody. Gerald Harmon cooperating with the territorial sheriff. The Brooks Ranch accountant, the mail-order bride they'd laughed at on the train platform 12 days ago, had put together a case that brought down one of the most established families in the territory. By mid-morning, people were finding reasons to pass by the Brooks Ranch. Some of them stopped. Some of them asked to speak to Amelia directly. She received them in the front room because Nathaniel suggested it, and she saw the value of it, though she would not have thought to do it herself. He had a better instinct for the social architecture of small towns than she did, which made sense. He had lived in this one his whole life. The first to come was a rancher named Walt Pruitt, who ran a mid-sized spread east of town and had been quietly struggling with overpriced supply contracts from the same vendor network. He had suspected something was wrong for months, but hadn't known what to look for. He sat in the front room with his hat in his hands and asked Amelia if she would look at his books. She agreed. Then a woman named Clara Hendricks, who managed the accounts for her husband's grain operation, came and asked the same thing. Then two more ranchers. A merchant. A woman who ran a boarding house and had been using a supply contractor she was increasingly suspicious of. By noon, Amelia had agreed to review 6 sets of accounts from 6 different operations in and around Harlow Creek. She sat at the table with a list of names and a fresh ledger, and she organized them by suspected complexity and estimated time. Mrs. Aldridge brought her a plate of food at 1 o'clock without being asked. Amelia looked up. Mrs. Aldridge set this plate down. She looked at Amelia with the sharp evaluating look she had worn since the first morning, and then she said, "I was wrong about you," with the precise economy of a woman who had never in her life apologized at length. "You didn't know me," Amelia said. "I knew you well enough to form an opinion I didn't earn," Mrs. Aldridge said. "That's different." She went back to the kitchen. Amelia ate her lunch and went back to her list. Nathaniel came in at 2 o'clock from the north pasture where the fence line had been repaired. He had dirt on his coat, and his hair was disordered from being under a hat all morning, and he looked at the list on her table and then at Amelia. "You've been busy," he said. "People came by," she said. "I think the Harmons were not exclusively focused on Brooks Ranch." He sat down across from her and looked at the names. "Walt Pruitt's been complaining about his supply costs for 2 years, he said. "Clara Hendricks mentioned something to me at church last spring." He looked up. "You're going to look at all of these. One at a time," she said. "Starting next week once the recovery documentation for your ranch is filed." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what's happening, don't you?" She looked at him. "You came here as a mail-order bride," he said. "And you've become this." He gestured at the list at the room at the front door, through which half the county had apparently walked in a single morning. "Something this town actually needs. Something this town could have used the capacity to see before they decided what I was at a train station," she said without particular bitterness. It was just true. "Yes," he said. "That too." He got up. I was almost to the door when she said, "Nathaniel." He turned. "Thomas," she said, "what will you do?" His face changed, not painfully, but thoughtfully, in the way of a man who had been sitting with a question all day and had arrived somewhere with it. "Thomas needs to make a formal restitution of some kind," he said. "Even if the territorial prosecutor decides his cooperation is sufficient to avoid charges, and I think it will, he has to make right what he did with his own hands. He knows that." He paused. I think he'll stay. If I let him. He doesn't have anywhere else to go, and I'm not my father, but I understand that you don't throw away family because they disappointed you. You make them earn it back." "Your father would have agreed with that," she said. "How would you know?" he said. Not defensively, genuinely curious. "Because he kept meticulous records for 30 years, she said. "A man who keeps meticulous records believes in doing things properly. Doing things properly and cutting people off at their first serious mistake are not compatible philosophies." He looked at her for a long moment. "You figured out my father's character from his accounting system," he said. "People put themselves into their systems," she said, "if you know what to look for." He shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, but in the small, reflexive motion of someone encountering something they hadn't expected. 3 days later, Calvin Harmon and Pete Dunbar were transferred to the Territorial Court in Cheyenne. Gerald Harmon in custody and cooperating fully accompanied them. The territorial prosecutor, having received Amelia's documentation and Braddock's report, announced that charges would be filed, including fraud, conspiracy, cattle theft, and the forgery of legal documents, the latter carrying the most serious potential penalties under territorial law. The forged land sale contract, which Gerald Harmon confirmed had been Calvin's work, was invalidated. The eastern parcel of Brooks Ranch remained what it had always been. Nathaniel Brooks's land, bought by his father, built into something worth protecting. The Territorial Court also ordered a civil recovery process against the Harmon estate, which meant that a portion of what had been stolen from Brooks Ranch could potentially be recouped through the courts. Amelia began that documentation the morning after the transfer, working from the same careful foundation she had built in the first week. It was on a Thursday evening, 10 days after the arrest, that the moment came that she had not planned for. She had been working late again. She was always working late. It was simply her nature, and Nathaniel had come to the office with coffee also as usual. But this time he came in, and instead of setting the coffee on the desk and leaving, he pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. She looked up. He looked at her with the directness she had come to recognize as his specific form of honesty. Not performed directness, but the real kind. The kind that sometimes made people uncomfortable because it had no comfortable buffer of indirection. "I want to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish it before you redirect me to a ledger." She set down her pen. "You arrived here 12 days before you were supposed to save my ranch," he said. "You arrived here and I was a coward. What I told myself at the time was that I had practical reasons that a ranch in my position required a certain kind of presence, that the image of the operation mattered as much as its substance. What I know now is that those were the thoughts of a man who had learned to see people the way this town sees people, and I should have known better, and I didn't." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that I know that. Not as an apology, I've apologized. As a fact about who I was and who I'm working to be different from." She was quiet. "I also want to say," he said, "that in 2.5 weeks you have changed the material condition of this ranch, the lives of my workers, my brother's situation, and if the people who came through that door this week are any indication, the financial welfare of most of the county. And you have done all of that while being, by any reasonable measure, the most capable and most honest person I have ever had the privilege of knowing." She looked at the desk for a moment. "That's a lot to live up to," she said. "You already live up to it," he said. "That's what I'm saying." She looked at him. And the thing that had been growing in the space between them, the thing that had started as mutual respect under difficult circumstances, and had been fed by 2 weeks of early mornings and difficult conversations, and the specific closeness that came from fighting something together. That thing was in the room with them now, present and recognized by both of them, and there was not much purpose in pretending otherwise. "Your 3 months aren't up," he said. "No," she agreed. "They're not. I would like to discuss what happens after them," he said. "When you're ready to discuss it." "I'm not ready yet," she said. "I know," he said. "But I'm not opposed to the conversation existing," she said. Something moved across his face that was the fullest, least controlled expression she had seen from him. It was not a triumphant look. It was the look of a man who had been given something he understood the value of. "That's enough." "Enough," he said. "For now, that's enough." He stood. He left. She sat in the quiet office with her pen in her hand, and the evening coming in through the window, and the ranch settling into its nighttime sounds around her. And she thought about the train platform 12 days ago, with a kind of detached precision, as if examining a document from a sufficient distance to see its whole shape at once. She had come off that train carrying hope in one hand and 400 miles of effort in the other, and a man had handed her a letter, and a town had watched, and she had stood there in the particular loneliness of someone who had been judged before she had a chance to speak. And then she had refused to get on the coach. That had been the decision that changed everything. Not Nathaniel stopping her, he had stopped the coach, but the decision had been hers, made in the space between releasing the door handle and turning around to face him. She had turned around, not because he apologized, and not because she wanted his approval. She had turned around because she was not finished, and she knew it, and she had never in her life walked away from something she wasn't finished with. She picked up her pen. She had 6 other people's accounts to begin reviewing next week. She had the Brooks Ranch recovery documentation to complete. She had a ranch that was still in the process of repairing relationships with suppliers and workers who had lost faith during the hard months. She had, though she would not have said this to anyone including Nathaniel, a reason to stay that had nothing to do with accounts. She opened the ledger. She worked until midnight. She was, as she always had been, precisely where she intended to be. The recovery documentation took 11 days to complete. Amelia knew it would take 11 days because she planned for 12 and finished 1 day early, which was how she had always operated. Estimate honestly, execute precisely, and let the extra day be a gift rather than a failure. She delivered the completed filing to Braddock on a Wednesday morning, watched him review the summary page with the careful attention she had come to trust from him, and signed her name at the bottom of the accompanying certification, with the same steady hand she had used on every document in the past 3.5 weeks. Braddock looked at the signature. He looked at her. "The territorial court is going to have questions," he said. "There will likely be a hearing in Cheyenne. They'll want the accountant who prepared this present to answer them." "I expected that," she said. "When?" 6 to 8 weeks. "I'll be here," she said. She rode back to the ranch. She was 2 miles out when she passed the spot on the back road where Gerald Harmon had blocked her wagon with his patient face and his patient hands and his certainty that a woman alone on a road could be managed. She passed it without slowing down and without giving it more than a glance, because she was not the kind of person who gave significant weight to places where things had been attempted and failed. What she was thinking about as the ranch came into sight was the list of accounts on her desk. 6 neighboring operations, waiting for her to find what the Harmon network had done to them. She had started with Walt Pruitt's books the previous Friday, 2 hours in, and she had already found the same fingerprints, the same supplier overcharge pattern, smaller in scale, but identical in method. She had left a note in the margin and scheduled time to return. There was a lot of work left to do. She had stopped thinking of that as a burden approximately 2 weeks ago. She was not sure exactly when the shift had happened. Somewhere between the forged contract and Thomas on the boardwalk, and Nathaniel saying that his father would have liked her somewhere in there. The work had stopped being a means of proving something and had become simply what it was, the right use of the particular skills she carried. She pulled the wagon into the yard and found Nathaniel waiting, which was not unusual. He had developed a habit of being in the vicinity when she returned from town that she suspected he would deny was a habit if she named it directly. "Braddock's satisfied with the filing," she said as she climbed down. "Good," he said. He took the reins from her without asking and tied the horse to the post. "Clara Hendricks sent a note this morning. She wants to know when you can start on her books." "Friday," she said. "I told her Friday." "She also sent a pie," he said. Amelia stopped walking. "A pie," she said. "Apple. Mrs. Aldridge put it in the kitchen." He paused. "Clara Hendricks has not, to my knowledge, sent a pie to anyone in this county in the 10 years I've known her." Amelia walked into the house. The pie was on the kitchen table. Mrs. Aldridge was looking at it with the same expression she had worn when she said she'd been wrong about Amelia, a kind of reluctant, precise respect. "Clara Hendricks baked that herself," Mrs. Aldridge said. "Brought it over personally. Said to tell you that she already found one overcharge just from what you told her to look for when you met last week, and it was enough to make her want to cry and then want to throw something at someone." "That's a natural sequence of reactions," Amelia said. "She said the throwing part was more satisfying," Mrs. Aldridge said. Amelia sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the pie and felt something move through her that was warm and uncomplicated and a little bit surprising. She was not accustomed to pies. She was accustomed to competence being received as a given, something expected, utilized, and unremarked. A pie was remarkable. A pie was someone saying in the particular language of women who communicated through practical acts that what you did mattered. She cut a slice and ate it standing at the table because she had work to do. Mrs. Aldridge watched her do it and said nothing, which was its own form of approval. The following week, the territorial court sent a letter confirming the hearing date in Cheyenne, 7 weeks out. The letter also contained a note from the prosecuting attorney, a man named Stafford, who wrote that her documentation was the clearest and most complete accounting evidence he had received in 14 years of territorial practice, and that he would like if she were willing to discuss the possibility of her serving as an expert accounting witness in the formal proceedings. She read the letter twice. She put it in the right-hand drawer of the desk. She went back to Walt Pruitt's ledgers. She told Nathaniel about it at supper. He read the letter without expression. He folded it and handed it back to her. Then he said, "Stafford is the best prosecutor in the territory. He doesn't ask for expert witnesses unless he believes they're necessary. He believes the defense will try to complicate the documentation," she said. "Make it look like amateur accounting rather than professional evidence. He wants someone who can stand in front of a judge and explain the methodology. Can you do that?" "I've explained complex accounting to people who didn't want to understand it my entire working life," she said. "A courtroom isn't meaningfully different from a ranch kitchen at 5:30 in the morning." Nathaniel looked at her across the table. Something in his expression shifted towards something she was increasingly able to read, that particular combination of admiration and something quieter and more personal underneath it. "You're going to go to Cheyenne and take apart the Harmon's defense in front of a territorial judge," he said. "If Stafford needs me to," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll go with you." "You don't need to," she said. "I know I don't need to," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The thing between them, that grown and present thing they had been moving around for weeks, with careful, deliberate steps, was right there again, patient as it always was, waiting for one of them to stop moving around it. "All right," she said. He nodded. He passed her the bread. She took it. They finished supper. It was 2 days after that when Thomas came to her office. She had not spoken to Thomas privately since the day at the sheriff's office. He had been present at supper every night, quieter than he used to be, and more careful in the particular way of people who were in the process of rebuilding something that had been damaged by their own hands. He did his work. He didn't make excuses. Nathaniel had given him a specific role in the supply renegotiation process, working with the new vendors to establish contracts, which meant he was making practical amends through the kind of work that needed to be done. It was a smart arrangement. It kept Thomas useful and accountable simultaneously. He knocked on the office door and stood in the opening, hat in hand. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He turned the hat in his hands for a moment. Then he said, "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since the day in the sheriff's office. I've started about 12 versions of it, and they all sounded wrong." "Most apologies do," she said. "This isn't just an apology," he said. "It's, I need you to understand that I didn't know when I was answering Calvin's questions what I was feeding. I know that doesn't excuse it. I know that ignorance at the start doesn't cover what I did after I found out. I'm not trying to reduce it." He met her eyes. "I'm trying to say that you could have let me walk into that sheriff's office cold, without warning, without time to make a choice, and you didn't. You gave me 2 hours to decide who I was going to be. I don't know that I deserved those 2 hours." She looked at him steadily. "Whether you deserved them isn't what I was thinking about," she said. "I was thinking about what was true and what was useful. The truth was that you had information Braddock needed. The useful thing was getting you into that office voluntarily rather than under arrest. Those two things happened to align with giving you a choice, so I gave you one." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You make it sound purely practical." "It was partly practical," she said. "And partly, I have spent my entire life being written off before I had a chance to make a choice. I don't do that to other people if I can help it." Something moved through Thomas's face that was genuine and unguarded. "Nathaniel was right," he said. "About what?" she said. "He said after that first day that you were the kind of person this family had been needing for a long time." Thomas looked at his hat. He said it like he was annoyed at himself for noticing, which is Nathaniel's way of being moved by something. She did not respond to that. She looked at the ledger in front of her and then back at Thomas. "The vendor contracts," she said. "How are they going?" Thomas understood the shift. 3 of the 5 are signed. The other 2 are meeting with Nathaniel and Grady this week. Good, she said. Make sure you get price guarantees in writing for the first full year. Don't accept verbal commitments. I know, he said. Do you? She said. Not unkindly. He almost smiled. I'm learning, he said. He got up to go. At the door he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in a long time, and I don't mean because of the accounts. He left before she had to respond to that. She sat with her pen in her hand and her eyes on the window for a moment. Then she went back to the Pruitt ledgers. 3 weeks later, the hearing in Cheyenne was confirmed for the following Thursday. Stafford sent a briefing document. Amelia read it twice, made 12 notations in the margins, and drafted a letter back with 3 specific clarifications she needed from him before she could testify with full precision. She sent the letter with the Morning Post and had his reply by Friday. She and Nathaniel left for Cheyenne on a Tuesday, 2 days before the hearing, because Amelia believed in arriving somewhere before you needed to be there. They rode the train. They sat across from each other in the car, and Nathaniel read a ranching periodical, and Amelia reviewed her testimony notes, and the car rocked gently, and outside the window. Wyoming territory went by in its particular combination of beauty and severity that she had come to recognize as the character of the place, not gentle, not forgiving, but entirely honest about what it was. She liked that about it. She had always preferred honesty in a landscape the same as she preferred it in a person. You're not nervous, Nathaniel said. She looked up from her notes. No. Most people would be, he said, testifying in front of a territorial court. I've done harder things than explain a ledger to someone with authority, she said. He looked at her steadily. Like what? Like standing on a train platform in front of a town full of strangers while reading a letter that told me I wasn't what someone wanted, she said. That was harder than any courtroom. He held her gaze. The train moved around them. He looked, she thought, like a man who was going to say something and then decided to say something different and better. You were exactly what was needed, he said. You were just in the wrong place when I was too limited to see it. She looked back down at her notes. Stop that, she said quietly. Stop what? Saying things that make it difficult to concentrate on testimony preparation. A pause. I'll wait, he said. Good, she said. She heard the almost smile in his voice when he went back to his periodical. She kept her eyes on her notes, and the corner of her mouth moved once briefly, and she controlled it and went back to work. The hearing lasted 2 days. Amelia testified for 4 hours across both days, sitting straight in the witness chair and answering Stafford's questions in the clean, direct language she used for everything. No elaboration beyond what was asked, no performance, just the facts arranged in the order that made them clearest. She walked the court through the invoice pattern, the transport discrepancies, the corporate registration linking Gerald Harmon to Calloway, and the forged signature, explaining each element with the methodical patience of someone who had spent years explaining complicated things to people who needed to understand them. The defense attorney tried 3 times to challenge her methodology. She answered each challenge with the specific counter-evidence she had prepared specifically because she had anticipated those challenges. After the 3rd attempt, the defense attorney stopped trying. When the court recessed at the end of the 2nd day, Stafford found her in the corridor and said with the particular concision of someone who had seen a great deal of testimony over 14 years and was not easily impressed, I've never seen a witness hold a courtroom that quietly and that completely. You should consider this professionally. I'm considering a great many things, she said. She meant it. She had been considering in the specific way she considered things systematically, without rushing the question of what came next. Her 3 months were up in 8 days. She had made no decisions. She had made, as she had told Nathaniel that evening in the front room, no decisions yet. The yet had not expired. They were on the train back to Harlow Creek the 2nd afternoon when Nathaniel put down his periodical and said without preamble, in the manner of a man who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it, I want to ask you something. She put down her notes. I'm not asking you about the marriage arrangement, he said. I'm asking you something before that. I'm asking whether you want to stay. He held her gaze. Not because the accounts need you. Not because the county needs you. Not because the territorial court has a hearing in 7 weeks. Because you want to. Because this place has become something to you the way it has become something to me since you arrived. I want to know if that's true." She looked at him. This was the moment she had been working toward and around for 5 weeks, not working toward in the way of someone who had a predetermined destination, but in the way of someone who had been moving carefully through unfamiliar terrain and had arrived somewhere and needed to look at it clearly before deciding whether to set down her bags. She looked at it clearly now. She thought about the morning she had turned back from the coach, that moment of decision in which she had chosen to stay, not for him, but for herself. She thought about 11 days of account work and 41 pages of evidence, and Calvin Harmon on a road, and Gerald Harmon with his careful face, and Braddock saying she moved faster than anyone expected. She thought about Mrs. Aldridge saying she'd been wrong. She thought about Clara Hendricks's pie. She thought about Walt Pruitt and Clara and the 4 others whose books were waiting on her desk, and the look on their faces when they understood that someone was going to find what had been taken from them. She thought about Nathaniel coming in with coffee at 9 o'clock on her first night and setting it on the desk and leaving without hovering. She thought about him catching Thomas's arm on the step without a word. She thought about him saying in a train car moving through Wyoming territory, "I'll wait." "Yes," she said. "It's true." He did not move immediately. He looked at her the way he had looked at the eastern pasture that first day. She arrived with the recognition of someone seeing clearly for the first time something that had always been worth seeing. "Then I'm going to ask you the other question," he said. "When you're ready." "I know," she said. "And you'll tell me when that is." "I will," she said. He picked up his periodical. She picked up her notes. The train moved through the late afternoon light, and Wyoming territory opened around them, honest and unhurried, and exactly what it was. They arrived back in Harlow Creek at 6 in the evening. The station was the same station where Amelia had stood 5 weeks ago, with a letter folded against her chest and a town watching. The same platform, the same angle of light, the same sounds of a working town at the end of a working day. She stepped off the train and stood on the platform and breathed it in. A woman, she recognized one of the wives who had stood outside the dressmaker's shop that first morning. One of the voices she had heard at the precise volume designed to carry was standing near the station house. She saw Amelia and stopped. The expression that crossed her face was complicated recognition. Something that might have been shame, and then something else more recent that looked like the beginning of a different kind of recognition entirely. She nodded, deliberately. A real nod, not a social one. Amelia returned it, even straightforward, without warmth, but without coldness. Then she picked up her bag and walked off the platform into the town. Nathaniel was beside her. He didn't take her bag. He knew better than to take her bag. He walked at her pace and let her lead, and the town opened around them in the early evening, and people moved past, and some of them looked, and some of them nodded, and one of the cowboys from the ranch spotted them from across the street and raised a hand. "There's a problem at home," Nathaniel said, not alarmed, just practical. "Grady sent word that one of the new supply contracts has a discrepancy in the delivery terms. He thinks someone at the vendor's end switched a clause between negotiation and signing." She looked at him. "Which vendor?" "The grain supplier, Henderson Brothers." "I'll look at it tonight," she said. "You've been in a courtroom for 2 days," he said. "The courtroom was easy," she said. "Contracts are interesting." Haimad, a sound that was halfway between exasperation and something considerably warmer. "You're going to work until midnight again." "Probably," she said. "Then I'll bring the coffee," he said. She didn't answer that immediately. She let it sit, and she let herself feel the weight of it, the specific, uncomplicated rightness of being somewhere that expected her in the work she was good at, with a man who had learned to bring the coffee without hovering, and to wait without demanding, and to mean what he said without decorating it. She had come off a train 5 weeks ago, carrying hope and 400 miles of effort, and a letter that tried to turn both of those into nothing. She had refused to let it. That refusal, that one quiet, absolute decision on a train platform in a strange town, had led her here. Not because the world rewarded stubbornness, or because righteous women were guaranteed righteous endings. The world was not organized that way, and she had never believed it was. But because she had known her own worth with the particular certainty of someone who has tested it against real difficulty, and she had refused to let someone else's failure of perception become her definition, she had turned back from that coach for herself. Everything else, the accounts, the evidence, the hearing, the pie. Nathaniel with his coffee at 9 o'clock, everything else had followed from that one decision. "The Henderson contract," she said. "Do you have it at the house?" "Grady brought it in from the office," Nathaniel said. "It's on the desk." "Good," she said. She walked toward the ranch wagon. The evening settled around Harlow Creek warm and ordinary, and the town she had been laughed at in became simply the town she lived in, which was how it was supposed to be. Not a wound, not a triumph, just a place where she had work to do and had chosen to do it. She climbed up onto the wagon. Nathaniel untied the horse and came around to the other side. Before he climbed up, she said without looking at him, "Ask me in the spring." A pause. "The other question," she said. "Ask me in the spring." The pause was long enough to have a shape. "Spring," he said. "March," she said. "After the Cheyenne hearing is behind us, and the county accounts are finished, and the Henderson contract is sorted, when everything is in order. You want the books balanced before you answer," he said. And the way he said it told her he understood completely that this was not a condition, but a description that she was telling him the truth about herself, that she was a woman who needed things in order not because she was afraid, but because order was how she thought, how she moved, how she loved. "Yes," she said simply. She felt him look at her for a moment. Then she heard him smile, not saw it, heard it in the quality of the silence just before he spoke. "I can wait until March," he said. He climbed up. He picked up the reins. The wagon moved out of Harlow Creek and onto the road toward Brooks Ranch, and the evening was long and golden, and the land ran out in every direction toward the edges of what she could see, honest and unhurried and absolutely real. She had arrived in Wyoming territory 5 weeks ago as a woman nobody wanted. She was leaving for home. And when March came and the books were balanced and everything was in order, Amelia Rose Carter would answer the question she had already decided in the careful, certain, undefeatable way of a woman who had always known exactly what she was worth. She had never needed anyone to tell her. She had only ever